think about this for a moment. Are are we are we fundamentally selfish? Or is there something genuinely good, kind built into us?
Yeah, it's a huge question, isn't it? Philosophers, scientists, everyone's wrestled with it for ages.
And it feels like it's everywhere, from deep philosophy right through to, well, today's news.
It really does get to the core of what being human is all about. And what's exciting now, I think, is we're starting to actually see the biology behind it all.
Which is exactly where we're headed today in this deep dive for you, the learner. We're diving into the neurobiology of, well, let's call it the selfish-selfless spectrum. We have this really interesting review article as our guide. It's called Psychopathy to Altruism,
Yeah.
Neurobiology of the Selfish-Selfless Spectrum
Right. It was published back in 2018 by James Sun and Don Gash.
in Frontiers in Psychology.
Yeah.
And it feels like a great starting point.
It really is. It pulls together so much information, biology, genetics, neuroscience, all trying to make sense of these, contrasting human behaviors.
Yeah, it takes it beyond just ideas and looks at the actual brain circuits and stuff.
Exactly. The machinery, so to speak.
So our mission for you today is to really get into the science behind both ends of this spectrum. We're talking extreme selfishness, like in psychopathy, and that really profound selflessness, altruism. We want to explore, how much is nature, how much is nurture?
And how do things like brain chemicals and circuits actually play into it? Where do we land on that spectrum?
The article kind of sets it up by comparing those extremes, right? And then looking at what influences things.
Yeah, it's a useful framework. And it's not about just slapping labels on people, of course.
No, definitely not.
It's about understanding the biological mechanisms that contribute to this whole range of social behaviors we all show, to different degrees.
Okay, so let's start on the selfless side, altruism. The article brings up Auguste Comte from the 19th century.
That's right. He coined the term. The basic idea being, putting others' needs ahead of your own. Simple enough, it sounds like.
But is it ever truly simple? Is it ever totally selfless? That's still debated, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Is there always some kind of benefit, even just feeling good about helping? Or can it be purely for the other person?
Right, because you've got thinkers like Hobbes or Ayn Rand basically saying, nope, it's always self-interest driving things.
Even if it looks selfless, it's just a smart way to benefit yourself somehow.
And biologically, you hear about Richard Dawkins' selfish gene idea, genes just using us to survive.
Right. But then on the other side, you have people like Hume or Rousseau who argued for a more innate human kindness, empathy, which actually lines up pretty well with some modern neuroscience thinking too.
So maybe we're more wired for cooperation than we sometimes think.
It raises that possibility, definitely. Are we fundamentally competitive or cooperative? Or more likely, a mix?
The review suggests visualizing it as this kind of inverted U-shaped curve.
Yeah.
That seems helpful.
It is. On one extreme end, you've got, say, individuals with strong psychopathic traits, very selfish. On the other end, you have people who are incredibly altruistic, sometimes called zealous altruists, maybe even to their own harm.
And most of us are somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. Floating around in the middle of that curve. And it's not fixed either.
Right. It can shift based on culture, experiences, all sorts of things.
It's a really dynamic picture of human behavior.
So evolutionarily speaking, how does selflessness even make sense? It feels like it goes against survival of the fittest.
Yeah, that's the puzzle, isn't it? But it probably was favored, evolutionarily speaking, especially for species like us.
Because our kids need so much care for so long.
Precisely. That long dependency period is key. It means parents and the whole community are vital for survival, and it allows for complex social learning.
The article mentions group selection, like sacrificing for your kin helps your shared genes carry on.
And we definitely see that kin preference in nature. Protecting relatives seems hardwired to some extent.
Makes sense.
But it might go beyond just genes. The review floats the idea that maybe altruism itself became culturally valuable.
How so?
Like being seen as cooperative and trustworthy could boost your social standing, your fitness in a social sense.
Okay, that's an interesting angle. And then there's this idea connecting it all back to parenting.
Yeah, this is a really core hypothesis in the paper, that the fundamental parental instinct that drive to care for vulnerable offspring might be the evolutionary root.
So the ability to see someone needs help, understand their distress signals, and then act, that got broadened out.
That's the idea. Evolution built upon those basic caregiving circuits. Our pro-social brains, as they call them, are really good at learning and passing on these compassionate responses.
And our long childhood is crucial for that learning. This neuron-based heredity concept.
Exactly. It's not just genetic inheritance, but learned behaviors shaping brain development, passed down through experience and culture.
And it's good for the parents too, right? Not just the kids?
Absolutely. It's mutual. Caring for offspring enhances the caregiver's well-being and obviously increases the chance the offspring and their genes survive.
Win-win.
And if you zoom out, these basic pro-social skills are really the bedrock of civil society, allowing cooperation beyond just family.
Okay, but we know culture shapes us massively. How does that interact with our biology on this selfless spectrum?
Well, the review points to some really dramatic cross-cultural differences. There was this study from 1975. It found that based on the tasks used, 100% of the Kenyan children studied showed altruistic behavior. 100%.
Wow.
Compared to
only 8% of children in the U.S. sample.
8%. That's huge. What did they link that to?
Things like family structure, how much women contributed economically, whether kids had specific chores that benefited the family.
So the environment, the expectations really matter.
Hugely. And other studies found similar patterns. Kids in Mexico or from Hopi culture or in Israeli kibbutzim tended to show more pro-social behavior than, say, middle-class American kids studied at the time.
And you see it in whole societies, too. Yeah, contrasting highly cooperative groups like the Semi people with more individualistic, sometimes warring groups like the Waorani, it suggests the societal focus really channels these tendencies.
So this neuron-based heredity, the cultural learning, might actually be more powerful than genes at the population level for altruism.
That's what some research cited in the review estimates, yeah. Culture seems to have a really significant influence.
Okay, so if culture and environment are so important, what's happening inside our heads? What about brain structures?
Well, one interesting finding is a correlation between the size of the amygdala.
That's the emotion center, right? Almond-shaped.
That's the one. A correlation between its size and how many social connections and groups someone belongs to.
Really? So more friends, bigger amygdala, roughly speaking?
The data points towards a positive correlation. Yeah, even adjusting for overall brain size. The amygdala is crucial for social cognition processing emotions like fear, vigilance, reading faces.
Kind of like a social radar.
That's a good way to put it. It might even regulate how comfortable we feel in social settings based on rewards and past experiences.
And this might even connect, maybe surprisingly, to things like our political views.
This is a fascinating, though still debated area. Our politics are obviously shaped by genes, culture, experience, a whole mix.
Sure.
But some research suggests the amygdala might play a role in those quick, gut-level social judgments. Maybe even things like voting based on appearance.
The review mentions specific findings. Something about Republicans and Democrats in a risk task.
Yeah, one study reported increased right amygdala activity in Republicans and increased anterior insula activation in Democrats during that kind of task.
And differences in size, too. Gray matter volume.
Other work found correlations between larger right amygdala volume and identifying as conservative, and larger anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC volume, and identifying as liberal.
Okay, the ACC. That's involved in decision-making, error-checking, things like that.
Exactly. Executive functions, reward-based decisions, conflict monitoring. It's also implicated in feeling gratitude, processing positive social stuff. So you can see how it might relate to processing different political ideas.
But complex, obviously.
Very complex, and correlation isn't causation, of course.
Right. Okay, let's talk empathy. That feels central to the selfless side. What's the neuroscience there?
Well, one study they discuss used the dictator game, where you split money and a needle test, watching someone get a potentially painful jab.
Okay.
They found people who offered more money to those with lower status also scored higher on empathic concern measures.
Yeah, their brains reflected that.
Yes. When watching the needle part, they saw more activity in the primary somatosensory cortex.
The part that feels our own physical sensations.
Exactly. It supports this self-other resonance idea. Our brain kind of mirrors what we see others experiencing.
Yeah.
And those who donated more also showed greater activity in the left amygdala and left fusiform cortex when imitating faces.
Areas linked to face processing and empathy.
It all seems interconnected.
So it feels like brain chemistry hormones, neurotransmitters must be playing a big role too.
Oh, definitely. Oxytocin is a big one. The love hormone, though that's a bit simplistic.
Yeah.
The review mentions a specific variation in the gene for its receptor. OXTR RS53576. And interestingly, its prevalence seems to differ across cultures.
Right, the G allele more common in individualistic European American groups, and the A allele more in collectivist East Asian groups. That's wild.
It is pretty striking, and oxytocin does so much uterine contractions, milk letdown, sure, but also brain development, regulating social bonding, trust, generosity.
It produces fear too, right? And boosts empathy.
Yeah, reduces anxiety, can decrease xenophobia, increase monogamy in some species, enhance empathy, promote in-group conformity.
Yeah.
It's involved in a lot.
And maybe even physical health benefits.
Some research is looking into anti-inflammatory and wound healing effects, and it's been investigated for autism, though results there are kind of mixed.
And then there's vasopressin, another hormone.
Right. Linked more perhaps to sibling bonds and pair bonding in partners. Longer repeat sequences in its receptor gene correlate with stronger bonds.
So beyond regulating water balance and stuff, it's also key for social behavior.
Yeah, especially pair bonding in prairie voles, it works via reward circuits. It's also involved in social recognition and stress pathways in humans.
So variations in these hormone receptor genes could actually influence how pro-social we are, how much we trust people.
The evidence points that way. Variations in both OXTR and the vasopressin receptor gene, EVPR1A, have been correlated with trusting strangers, charitable giving, even civic engagement.
Okay, let's flip to the other extreme now. Extreme selfishness. Using criminal psychopathy as the example, what defines that?
Generally, it's a pattern of aggression, often violence, a striking lack of remorse or empathy, and it usually starts early. Prevalence rates in prisons in the US and UK are significant.
But the article stresses it's not just criminals, right? There's this idea of successful psychopaths.
That's a really important distinction. Unsuccessful ones end up in the criminal system. Successful ones might display similar core traits, but manage to function, even thrive, in society. Think con artists, maybe even some leaders.
The main tool for assessment is the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised.
Yes, but it leans heavily on antisocial and criminal behaviors, which is useful clinically, but maybe doesn't capture the full picture, especially in non-criminal populations.
And that leads to controversy about its use.
A bit, yeah. Is it measuring just criminality or the underlying personality? Is psychopathy one thing, or are there different factors?
So the PPIR, the Psychopathic Personality Inventory Revised, tries to get more at the underlying traits, effective interpersonal stuff.
Exactly. It measures things like boldness, social dominance, alongside manipulativeness, lack of empathy, impulsivity. And you can use it in non-criminal groups, too.
And it includes positive traits, like boldness.
Yes, which is interesting. The review notes that figures like Teddy Roosevelt or Churchill might score high on some PPIR factors retrospectively, shows it's not always a negative outcome.
But then someone like Hitler likely would too, a very different outcome.
Precisely. It highlights the spectrum of how these traits can manifest.
And these successful types might be more common than we think, maybe especially in certain jobs.
It's hard to say for sure, but estimates suggest higher rates in fields like business or politics. The book Snakes and Suits famously suggested a non-trivial percentage in the corporate world.
So what's going on in the brains of people with psychopathy?
A key finding seems to be dysfunction in emotional processing. Meta-analyses show they're impaired at recognizing emotions in others.
Especially fear and sadness.
Exactly. And even reduced neural responses to things like laughter. It fundamentally changes how they perceive social cues.
That must make connection really difficult.
You'd think so. It likely impacts their thinking, their actions, maybe contributes to the boldness and the lack of remorse.
And specific brain areas are involved. Prefrontal cortex, amygdala.
Yes, those key hubs for social-emotional processing seem to function differently. The prefrontal cortex, especially the ventromedial part, VMPFC, is crucial for pro-social behavior. Dysfunction there is linked to antisocial behavior.
The PFC is like the brain's CEO, right? The newer part.
Right. Responsible for executive control. It's heavily connected with the amygdala, which is more about basic emotional responses, threat assessment, and older region.
And their interaction is key.
Vital. The amygdala also connects to the hypothalamus, which regulates basic drives, hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin.
So it's all interconnected. And damage to that medial PFC area, like Phineas Gage.
Exactly. That's long been linked to psychopathic-like traits, lack of empathy, poor planning, dishonesty.
And studies find physical differences too, like smaller amygdalas,
Yes, smaller amygdala size and less gray matter in parts of the frontal and temporal lobes have been found in people with conduct problems. And kids with callous unemotional traits show less amygdala activity when seeing others distressed.
So a less reactive amygdala could explain the lack of empathy and fear, the boldness.
That's a leading hypothesis. Amygdala damage impairs fear learning and blunts stress responses. It fits with the callous unemotional traits.
And the hypothalamus, lower oxytocin, different stress response.
Lower oxytocin and reduced cortisol response to stress are seen in those with callous unemotional traits and linked to higher risk for criminal psychopathy. These hormones are critical.
What about the reward system? The article mentioned the striatum and the impulsive antisocial side of psychopathy.
Yeah, what's interesting there is the striatum, especially the nucleus accumbens, the brain's main reward center, is often found to be larger in individuals high on impulsive antisocial traits.
Larger and more active.
Functional MRI shows more dopamine release, more activity in the ventral striatum when anticipating or getting rewards. This reward hub is tightly linked to the PFC and other emotional areas.
So it's like they have a reward-dominant learning style.
That's a key idea in the review. For someone with callous unemotional traits and strong impulsive antisocial traits, things like rage or impulsive acts, especially without the normal fear break, might actually trigger dopamine release. Pleasure.
So antisocial acts could become intrinsically rewarding.
Potentially, yes. The lack of normal fear and stress responses, combined with this hyped-up reward for aggression or risk-taking, you can see how that could lead to the violent, impulsive behavior seen in criminal psychopathy.
The brakes are weak and the accelerator is strong, in a way.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah.
So the classic question, nature or nurture for psychopathy?
Like most things, it's both. Heritability for callous unemotional traits is pretty high, maybe around 47% in one recent estimate, though some parent reports put it higher.
And other traits like boldness.
Also moderately heritable, maybe 40–50%. Interestingly, these different facets don't seem strongly linked genetically. They might be separate dimensions.
And specific genes, like the oxytocin receptor gene we mentioned.
Yes, that's come up in 2 studies linked to callous unemotional traits, which is really interesting given oxytocin's prosocial role.
But giving oxytocin doesn't always help, right? Sometimes it increases aggression.
Exactly. It highlights how complex it is. The oxytocin our bodies make naturally is crucial for brain development. Giving it later as a drug has less predictable effects.
So nurture, the neuron-based heredity, must be hugely important too.
Absolutely critical. Brain development starts even before birth. Positive, supportive parenting is vital, especially early on.
And negative environments, chaos, abuse,
can have a really detrimental impact, especially if the parents themselves have callous, unemotional traits.
But there was that adoption study. That seemed hopeful.
Very hopeful. It showed that warmth and positive reinforcement from adoptive mothers significantly reduced the expression of callous, unemotional behaviors predicted by the biological mother's traits. It really shows nurture can make a difference.
So these traits are malleable, at least early on.
It seems so, which is encouraging. But the window for intervention might narrow. Adult criminal psychopaths often have more established brain differences, making therapy very difficult.
Though there was that juvenile treatment center, Mendota. Some success there.
Yes, their intensive program using rewards and consequences did reduce crime rates in those juveniles. But a significant risk for aggression often remained. That reward-based approach is being tried with younger kids now.
But for adults, still notoriously hard to treat. High recidivism.
Unfortunately, yes, that remains a major challenge.
Okay, let's swing back to the other end again, zealous altruism. The article contrasts everyday kindness with those big, heroic acts in the news.
Right. Small kindnesses are everywhere, but don't usually make headlines. It's the extreme cases risking life or limb for others, major sacrifices that capture attention. Like the Carnegie heroes.
These zealous altruists really go above and beyond, don't they? Like anonymous kidney donors.
Exactly. The review distinguishes between impulsive altruism, that quick reaction.
Like jumping onto train tracks.
Yeah. And more premeditated altruism, a conscious choice despite risks. Like the kidney donors, or David Eubank running into gunfire to save a kid. Even regular blood donation fits here.
It still feels like it clashes with survival of the fittest. How did Darwin think about it?
He saw that problem. Pure selfishness could actually hinder social evolution. He figured that as reason and foresight grew, we'd see the benefit of helping each other, maybe even inherit a tendency for benevolence.
And we see evidence for both types now. instinctive and cognitive kindness.
We do. Our mind-reading skills, understanding others' thoughts and feelings, are key for cooperation. And just perceiving others' emotions sets the stage for empathy and compassion.
And the review highlights two main factors promoting cooperation: empathy leading to altruism.
Yeah, that link is well established. Batson's hypothesis linked to oxytocin even.
And punishment for breaking social rules.
Right. Meta-analyses show punishment can boost cooperation, especially in high-trust societies. And feeling similar to someone increases both altruism towards them and punishment if they break norms. Helps group cohesion.
So what about the neurobiology of these super altruistic people?
Well, we see basic mind-reading skills developing incredibly early in infants, shaped by culture. Babies prefer pro-social characters by 6–10 months.
And sharing starts early too.
Simple reciprocity emerges in toddlers, and understanding give and take develops by around age 5.
But zealous altruism is more than just tit for tat. It's helping strangers at personal risk.
Exactly. Neuroimaging helps here. Empathy, as DeWall and Preston define it, is like understanding others by activating similar states in ourselves.
Like feeling their pain. The anterior insula and cingulate cortex activating.
Those areas light up both when we feel pain and when we empathize with pain. Sometimes other areas like motor cortex get involved too, like a simulation.
But too much empathy can be bad. Empathetic distress.
Yes, it can be overwhelming, even lead to PTSD. Compassion is slightly different. It's the action to help.
And that engages the reward system.
It does. The ventral striatum, VTA, medial orbitofrontal cortex. Helping feels rewarding, reinforcing the behavior and maybe calming the painful empathy.
Studies on altruistic giving show activity in the anterior insula and the temporoparietal junction.
Right. Insula linked more to emotional empathy, TPJ to cognitive empathy, like understanding someone's perspective.
And there was that amazing study comparing zealous altruists and psychopaths directly by Abigail Marsh.
Yes, really striking results. The altruists had larger brains overall, even accounting for volume, and specifically a larger right amygdala compared to controls.
Larger, that's the opposite of the finding in psychopathy.
Exactly. And the altruists were more responsive to fearful faces, but less responsive to angry faces. Again, contrasting patterns.
So completely different ways of processing emotional cues.
Fundamentally different. Both compassion and antisocial aggression might activate the reward system, but how they get there based on perceiving social cues seems dramatically different, like Walpole said. Comedy for thinkers, tragedy for feelers. Altruists feel it, act, get rewarded. Psychopaths have muted feelings, act aggressively, and that gets rewarded.
So is altruism also nature and nurture? Genes involved?
Seems likely. Genes for the reward system, oxytocin receptors. Maybe they're common because altruism is widespread. Studying genes linked to antisocial behavior might even point us to networks promoting prosociality.
Like the oxytocin receptor variants linked to callous traits. Are there genetic conditions that make people more altruistic, maybe?
Well, Williams syndrome is interesting. Gene deletions lead to less social fear, more trust of strangers, but also cognitive issues and peer problems. It's complex.
And autism involves hundreds of genes related to communication and mind reading.
Right, often leading to social challenges. And again, oxytocin therapy for autism has had mixed results. It suggests a whole network of genes sets the stage, but experience is key.
So nurture is critical again. Early life training.
Absolutely crucial. Pro-social tendencies emerge early, culture strengthens them. Positive parenting can even mitigate genetic risks for callous traits.
And the opposite, severe deprivation,
has devastating effects. Institutionalization can alter PFC amygdala connections, mess with the stress axis, lead to smaller brains, cognitive problems, emotional dysregulation, even psychosis risk.
But intervention can help even later.
Yeah.
And learning plays a role.
Yes, recovery is possible even in adolescence. And learning definitely shapes prosociality. Economic games show it. Learning the impact of your actions boosts pro-social choices linked to dopamine rewards.
Even animals learn vicariously.
Yeah.
Watching others in distress.
Rodent studies show that, activates empathy and reward circuits, especially if they've felt it themselves before. Humans show increased empathy after feeling pain, too. fMRI shows similarities between feeling and observing pain.
Even playing a compassion game can increase helping.
Yes, the Zurich pro-social game study showed that. And just reflecting on gratitude activates reward centers and boosts altruistic values. Dopamine pathways are involved in learning altruism.
And oxytocin links to that dopamine circuitry.
Seems so. Giving oxytocin increased the reward felt for reciprocated cooperation. It all points to social learning reinforcing pro-social behavior via these reward pathways.
So empathy and compassion aren't just nice ideas. They have biological roots essential for society.
Exactly. And successful cultures actively promote them. Think major religions or secular practices like mindfulness and meditation spreading now.
Which come from Buddhist traditions,
Yeah.
right? And can these actually make people more compassionate?
Research suggests yes. fMRI shows experienced meditators have increased activity in emotion regions like the ACC, amygdala, insula during compassion meditation.
And the more they train, the stronger the effect.
And it's used clinically too. Mindfulness with compassion meditation helped people with social anxiety, less anxiety, depression, more compassion.
In general benefits like less stress, maybe better immune function.
Yeah, mindfulness is linked to reduced stress hormones, inflammation, pain relief. Other meditation forms show influence on the nervous system, hormones, immunity.
It connects to understanding things like PTSD too, and therapies like yoga or EMDR.
Absolutely. It suggests these contemplative practices can actually change acquired traits, including unselfish behavior. It highlights our potential for change.
So, wrapping this all up, it's not really universal selfishness or universal goodness, is it?
No, those are too simple. It's a spectrum shaped by this complex dance between our genes and our neuron-based heredity, our learning, our culture, and reward processes are key drivers throughout.
And the extremes, psychopathy and zealous altruism, really teach us a lot about the social brain and how much both nature and nurture matter.
Definitely. And maybe the most hopeful part is the neuroplasticity. Our brains can change.
Right. Even with genetic predispositions, things like positive parenting or compassion training could make a difference.
It suggests potential for interventions. Reward-based therapies might even help mitigate violence.
So, a final thought for you, the learner. Given this neuroplasticity, this power of learning and culture, what's our potential, individually and collectively, to actually cultivate more empathy, more compassion?
Yeah. How much can we consciously shift ourselves and our societies along that spectrum? It's something to really think about, the dynamic nature of it all.